Hi, I'm Dr. Kurt Stuke, and welcome to the second of the welcome videos. In the first, we looked at some of the basic fields within philosophy, and in this video, we shall examine some of the basic concepts that will be in play throughout the course. So I thought it was worth the time to come in and just define these terms once critically. Thanks. So where do we begin? Well, in our previous video, we looked at four basic fields within philosophy, that is epistemology, metaphysics, aesthetics, and logic. And we defined those fields and showed how they interact and their relevance to the study of ethics. So let's start by offering a quick high-level overview of what is ethics. And as the text suggests, it is the study of morality and what is good, bad, right, and wrong in human conduct and behavior in a moral sense. I think that's fairly intuitive. So basically, we can look at good and bad. Now, when we say something is moral, what we're saying is it is good or it is right. And by that, what we're saying is somehow, if someone were to be moral, it would foster or bring about pleasure or happiness, and perhaps moral excellence, perfection, and probably within the community in which that agent or actor was located, it would bring about good things, such as harmony or creativity. The utilitarians, which we'll study next week, might say that it would bring about happiness, but not necessarily in a base sense, but in a higher sense as well. It would bring about commonweal, that which helps all of the members of society. And at the other end of the spectrum, the immoral is that which brings about the opposite. Because it fosters something that is wrong or bad, it hurts the society or the individual moral agent, him or herself. So those two are fairly straightforward. Not a lot of confusion typically, revolves around how do we define the moral and the immoral. But these last two terms that remain are the amoral and the non-moral, and those are somewhat confusing the first time that you encounter them. The amoral could be likened to the person that simply does not care about what is right or wrong. In a lot of our psychological dramas that we see through Hollywood, sometimes the antagonist, the anti-hero, is someone that, may know of the difference between right and wrong, but simply doesn't care, or is not capable of knowing the difference between right and wrong, therefore amoral. So one of the typical figurative ways of bringing out the difference between the moral and the amoral is to imagine the dastardly villain with the handlebar mustache, laughing maniacally, boo ha 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 ha. Right? That person is being immoral because they're doing something wrong on purpose, whereas the amoral person simply doesn't care. Now, non-moral is that which is out of the realm of morality altogether, and the text advances two interesting studies or examples, and one is a gun, and the second is the solving of a math problem. And if you're astute and kind of seeing where I'm going with this, those are problematic examples. The gun could be moral or immoral depending upon the scenario. I think what the authors are suggesting is the gun in and of itself is neither good nor bad. Instrumentally, it could be used towards a moral or an immoral end. And as far as, say, the solving of a math problem, if we look at physics and how physics was applied, say, towards the end of the Second World War, we introduced nuclear energy, and we also ended the Second World War through the destruction of two cities. So is anything ever non-moral would be a question that I would pose, and I realize that we cannot solve that issue. But I'm just going to put it out there on the table. The traditional definition for the purpose of this course will be that non-moral is out of the realm of morality altogether. Fair enough, but between you and me, outside of the course, as a sidebar, let's just put it out there that I wonder if there is such a thing as the non-moral. Okay? But anyway, those are the four basic concepts that we need to know in order to start unpacking things. And once again, that is the moral, the amoral, the immoral, and the non-moral. Above, we looked at ethics as the study of morality, and we made a distinction between that which is moral and that which is immoral. We noted that that which is moral brings about that which is good, that which is immoral brings about that which is bad. But you might be reading between the lines here and wondering, well, what's the source of good? What's the source of bad? How do we define, how do we even frame that? Well, in ethics, we have the field of axiology, which is the study of values. And values typically is the font or the that there which comes or flows the values. But that being said, it does not necessarily mean that all ethicists and philosophers agree upon how values ought to be defined. Most of you are probably cultural relativists, and you believe that that which is good is subjective. It's probably up to the culture, and some of you may even believe that it's up to the individual agent. Now, before I continue, let me assert and assure you that I'm not telling you to be subjective nor to be objective, but merely surveying the different fields within ethics and axiology that are available. My job is not to make you take one particular view or not, but to hopefully encourage you to critically engage with all of the different perspectives that are out there. So I've taught ethics for a long time, and I know that most of you are probably cultural relativists. That's one possibility. The other possibility is to go to the objective side and to assert that values are originated within either a supernatural being, a god, or gods, or perhaps even a principle that is geared towards the betterment of all of mankind. And it could be that reason was the basis, or it could be that pragmacy was the basis. There's a number of contesting views. This is a field within ethics that is linked to social justice and is linked to political philosophy, which are fields that we didn't study in our first video. But it's an ongoing debate. So it's not necessarily if you're objective, therefore, you're a theist or a believer in God. There are many possibilities here. Also asserted by the objective side of things is that values are embodied in nature itself. That is, there are some things that are just hardwired into what it is that we as human creatures will agree to. And finally, and this is a curious point that the authors of our text advance, and I think it's worthy of note. If you do believe in objective values, you must also assert that even if there were not human moral agents, say, in the field, then the values would still hold with or without moral agents to perceive or appreciate them. So that's the objective-subjective split in values and why values are the source of the good and of the bad listed earlier. We'll conclude this particular video by looking at what the authors refer to as three approaches. And the three approaches are the scientific or descriptive versus the normative versus the analytical or metaethics. Because they're treated separately or logically as distinct, it might appear as if these things are done separately, and if you're working as an ethicist. And I'm not so sure that that's the case. For example, we can look at how a society actually acts. Right? That would be the descriptive. This is what that particular group does. These are how these particular moral agents simply behave. The second question is, well, how ought they to behave? And that's the normative question. Anytime you have the verb ought in action, implied or explicit, you're asking a normative question. How ought I to live? What is good? What is the meaning of life? That's a normative phrasing, and that is one approach that will be used within ethics. It's not the only. Certainly, much like social scientists, ethicists can look at a field, do an empirical study, and say, well, this is what has happened, and look using data. This is the actions or the outputs, morally speaking, that have been documented. It's all of philosophical work is not necessarily pie in the sky or abstract work, but it is true that the scientific or descriptive approach is different from the normative approach. Doesn't mean that they can't work together in a sort of mixed methods approach to bring about a desired change. And lastly, metaethics. Metaethics will ask what is the source of a claim of meaning in general, and try to boil down, reduce perhaps what was said normatively to a moral proposition that can then be analyzed. And for a meta-ethicist, the real ladder here is hardcore and rigorous analysis. That will prevent us from taking language on holiday and cut through the slack and the chaos that is introduced through loosely formed propositions, loosely formed language and meanings, and help us get to the discrete facts or assertions of the matter.